In this section, we'll take a look at putting the score and health on screen, and we'll start treating... in this section, we'll work on putting the health and score on screen, and we'll start implementing some of the stuff that we really roughed out in the first scene. So we're going to create a new scene. Come up here, we'll click plus, add a new scene. We're going to call this one game, and then we're going to go back to the old scene, and we're going to call it level 1. Okay, so we're going to go back to the new scene game. I'm going to, I'll just adjust the screen a little bit, and tapping N in order to get the place where I can change it to a GLSL shading and change that to Blender Game. All right, so I'm going to type 7 to get a top-down view, and then from here I'm going to add a camera. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to name this camera my heads-up display camera, and clicking the center mouse wheel, and here, let me change this to, where is it? There, okay. All right, so clicking the center mouse wheel to reposition, dragging the blue arrow up the z-axis just so that our camera is just a little bit above, doesn't really matter exactly. Hitting 0, and now we see a little bit of grid lines. Your display doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it's a start. So, I am now going to, we're going to have the score over here and health over here, and I'm going to click here. I'm going to add a mesh circle, and we'll change it to 16 vertices. Going to go into the edit mode. I could click that by doing tab, but I'm just showing you what I'm doing. In edit mode, click the F button. What that did was it turned the open circle. I'm going to do Command Z or Control Z to show what it looked like. That's just an empty circle full of lines. When I hit the F button, now we have a face that connects those circles. That's all that I did there. So I'm going to scale that down. I'm going to scale it down so it looks something like that. Right now it's just black. I'm going to add a new material. This is just going to be a little icon that represents a coin, and I'm going to make this a clicking shadeless. So now we have something that looks something like the coin from the previous level. And over here, I want to create a heart icon. So follow me along. I'm going to add mesh circle. I just want 8 vertices. And I'm going to hit tab into the edit mode. I'm going to drag this vertex, G, Y, down. I'm going to select that. I'm going to hit shift and select again with the right mouse. SX to scale it in. And so we're now getting something that looks a little bit like a heart. I'm going to select edges. That edge, I'm going to hold down shift, that edge, that edge, that edge. Each of these edges I'm going to come over here and I'm going to subdivide. And when I click down here to edit the vertices, you'll see I have now points in the center here. Scale that out a little bit and scale that G, Y down a little bit. And we have something that passes as a heart. So A to select all those things, F to create a face. Going to scale that down so it looks something like that. Move it over, and then we will add a red shadeless material. Shadeless just because there's no light source on this particular camera, so I'm just going to make these things that we're looking at just kind of glow. All right, so next we need to create a text display. Add text. This object is Blender's way of displaying text strings and numbers and data and so forth. We're going to come over here and call this one score. And we'll create another one over here. Add text S to scale it down, moving the mouse. Call this one health. And we'll create a new material. We'll just make it a shadeless white material. And we'll give that, there's that material I just created. There it is. So now we have two text objects. I'm going to hit Tab in order to go into edit mode. Just change that to 100, our default health. And over here, Tab, score of 0. I'm going to select both of those things, move them around. Your display does not have to look exactly like mine, and we can always adjust things and tweak them later, but that's good enough to get started. And, yep, okay. So, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here, and I'm going to add something that Blender calls an empty. It's just kind of a dummy object that I'm calling controller game, and it's just going to contain things like it's going to contain the code to link my scenes with this heads-up display. I'll show you what I mean. With this new empty that I've called controller game, with that selected, I'm going to add an always sensor. I'm going to add an actuator that's called scene. One of the scene modes is called add background scene, and I'm going to add level 1 as a background scene to this game. So now when I hit play, doesn't that look familiar? Okay. So now nothing's happening here. Score is not being impacted, and I collected those coins, and if I can get up there to get that goal, nothing's going to happen. But this is the secret that will allow all those things to work. So bear with me, and I'll show you what we need to do. Under here, under the score, I collect the score, and I have to click Add Text Game Property, which is just simply a way for Blender to interact with the display you see on the screen. Add Game Property, I call this score. There we go. We're going to call this, change it to an integer, whole number, rather than text. So here with score selected, I'm going to add a message sensor, and I'm going to listen for score. If you remember, every time that we collected a coin, it sent the message score, but I said nobody was listening. Well, now this score display is what's listening. So every time score arrives, we're going to add, click Property, Add. We're going to add 1. No, sorry, we're going to, to the score, we're going to add 1. That's it. So property has to be the score. We add 1 to it. So each time we get score, it adds 1. So, and I'm going to show you something else. There's if I click this I right here, that allows me to then come over here and click Game, Show Debug Properties. And we'll see this 0 score. If I hit P, now we get this overlay that says the upper left-hand corner that says score equals 0. Now, when I click on that coin, you can see that the big 0 next to the coin doesn't change. But in the debug properties, it says now score equals 1. So the game is noticing that I'm collecting coins, but I haven't yet told Blender to update this visible display. It's actually quite easy to do that. Under Actuator, Property, leave assign text. What that means is I'm going to put the value score into this textual display. And I'm going to call this update, and I'm going to call this score plus plus for increment score. So now, when I hit play, collect the coin, now we see the big number next to the icon matches the little debugging text. So we can now hide the debug properties and turn that off. We don't need that anymore. So, so that I think is that's a tricky way of doing things, or a tricky thing that isn't intuitive, but you know, a few things in life really are, I guess. All right, so next, I also want to go here to health. I'm going to set up a sensor, a message that listens for hazard, which if you remember we had all the flame objects send that message. And when we encounter the hazard message, then we will change the property. Oh, there's nothing there. That's because over here, I need to add text game property and add game property and call this health. Okay. Now we should be able to change the mode to add. Under property health, we're going to add -10. And now we need to connect that, and then we also need to update that text. So we'll add property, assign text, the value health. To remind you, that's the update. That's health. Equals health -10. Connect those guys, and now when we go burn ourselves in the flames, we see our health being impacted. Now, what is this? We see the text minus here. I'll show you what's happening. We just see the text -10 being added. That's because over here, I left health as a string. Health has to be an integer, which by default will start with 100. And so we can play. And now we see this is what we expect. Okay, so next we'll add, here, I'll move this guy back over here where it was. And next, let's go back to the level, and we're going to add a health power-up. So I'm just going to click over here, add a mesh, add a cube, drag it up a little bit on the z-axis, tab into edit mode, S.5, just to shrink it down in size. Over here, I'm going to call this Power Up Health, and we'll give it a new material. We'll make it shadeless material. We'll give it transparency of 0.75, and we'll add a texture, new. I have already created, you can see, there we go. I created that texture just to save time, prepared in advance. And as we've done before, we in edit mode, you reset, and now you see that texture is now applied to this box. Tab into object mode with our health power-up collected, power-up health collected, and we'll do an always. We'll add the action, and remember that coin action that made the coin spin. Let's do the same thing. Start at frame 1, end at frame 20. And that's pretty much what we expect. Play has to be loop end. Because we don't want to run into that like a brick wall, we turn that into ghost. And just kind of to prove that we've encountered it, we're going to add a sound that plays a power-up sound. We'll play it through the end, drag that, and test it out. Okay, well, that went under always. Well, I don't want to do that. There we go, I want to add the collision sensor. That's what I need to do. I need to have, when this collides with the player, Then we will play the sound. There we go. Power up sound effect. Play through the end. And we also need to send a message. Restore health. Again, there's nobody listening for that right now, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, let's play that. There we go, that works. And now, just as the situation with the coin, we're going to do the same thing in object mode. I'm going to hit Shift-D to create a copy, GX, and just to move this aside a little bit. I'm going to call this copy Power Up Health Collected. We're going to, with the collected selected, just get rid of all these logic bricks, create new stuff on our own. We're going to say, when we collide with the power-up, instead of playing this sound, we're going to edit. We're going to add an instance of Power-Up Health Collected. Whoops, I hit the wrong thing. Add an instance of Power Up Health Collected. There we go. And we'll make it go for about 100 ticks, just because that sound effect is kind of long. That works. And then we're going to edit object, and we want to end this object. We need to move this to a separate layer. We're going to display that hidden layer so that we can keep working with it. And then that was by hitting that button with Shift selected. Now, here we're going to add an always, action, coin action, loop end, start at frame 1, move to 20, collect those across. And I also want a motion action, simple motion on the z-axis. We'll go up 0.05. Again, 0.05. There we go. And we'll collect that. And now, just to test it out, yep, that looks good. And we will hide that alternate layer. Could have just clicked that one with the left mouse. P to play over here, and aha, here's what I forgot to do. Bring that back again. I forgot to add the sound. So we need to add the sound, the power-up sound, and play through the end of that power-up sound. So let's try that again. Okay, that works. Click on that to get rid of the other layer, and now when we collide into it, good. Okay, I think that guy's a little bit too high, so I'm going to make him down a little lower. P. Okay. All right. So so far so good. Now what we need to do is go back to game, and we have the visual feedback. But we have nothing that's listening for power up and that is ready to give the restore. So we will now, from here, we will listen for the message restore health, and close those bricks to give us some more room. When that happens, we'll change the property. We will assign health 100, and see this thing right here that already has property update? We can actually reuse that just by dragging it there. We want to make sure that the update is called after we assign a property, so we can slide it down like that. So that's one of the very powerful things. When you start having a lot of complex action, you can reuse your logic bricks if you know what you're doing. So first, let's just make sure that this works. And so I'll damage myself over here, and then, yep, works just fine. And I can damage myself again. So what's happening is when that restore health message is sent from the level, this text object is listening, and it runs over here. When we get restore health, it does restoring the health in this variable, which is an invisible variable that lives inside this string, and then we display that message by clicking this update. Same thing over here. When the hazard comes in, we damage the health by taking away 10, and then we just reuse this brick. So, convenient way of saving a little bit of typing. And there, yeah, so we can minimize all that because we're taking good care to name all our logic bricks. And if you do a good job, call it score, naming your logic bricks, your coding looks a lot less like spaghetti code. All right, so that ends part 3 of the tutorial.